good evening, and welcome to What's Your Story? I am your host, James Ransom Reed Jr. And man, do we have stories for you with my guest, Mr. John Mills. He's a genealogist. Yeah, that's already telling you what's going to happen here tonight. He's got some stories. He's got some experiences. He's got some information that we will absolutely adore and enjoy about the joy of genealogy and about the hidden history that so few people know. I am happy and honored to have Mr. John Mills here with us today on What's Your Story? Welcome, John.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's start off by giving Terry Wilson a shout out.
Oh, yeah, Terry.
Go ahead.
Terry's been incredible. I'm on the Connecticut Freedom Trail Committee with her.
Tell people what that is. What is the Connecticut Freedom Trail?
The Connecticut Freedom Trail honors locations within Connecticut that show the resilience and the history of the African American experience here. And so they've got some 170 sites that are aligned to the Connecticut Freedom Trail. So if anyone out there knows of a site or a location that's important to the African American experience in Connecticut, the Connecticut Freedom Trail would be the place to get them acknowledged.
All right, but Terry is a phenomenal person, right?
Oh yeah, she's phenomenal.
Yeah.
She's been incredibly helpful for the work that I do. She's come to pretty much any of the celebrations of some of these people that my nonprofit, the Alex Briand Corporation, has set up. And she's just constantly just been a consummate a friend and kind person to me, so yes.
Well, look, I like to tell the audience a bit about the person who I'm interviewing so they can get a feel for who you are.
Yes.
Okay, so where were you born? Where did you go to school? What degrees do you hold? Yada, yada, please.
Oh, yeah, yes. I was born and raised in San Diego, California.
San Diego?
Yes. And I moved here in 1998, and people asked me, what are you, nuts? But, well, but I was in technology, I still am, a software architect. And I had been doing software development, and at the time, my company was moving its headquarters or centralizing software development and networking to Connecticut. So that's what moved me out here. But growing up, I knew very little about my lineage.
Like most of us.
Like most of us. My grandfather passed away in 1987.
And there went a wealth of knowledge.
Right, and I knew very little about his history.
Yep.
I knew he was from the South,
Yep.
but that's all I knew. And growing up, prior to that, my father was very heavy, as many were in California in the 70s, into the messages that were being taught around the Panthers and the US organization.
Muslims,
yeah, they were kind of coming up in California, and he was really heavy about trying to get me not to see my color or my hair texture as anything less. He wanted me to have a pride in who I was. And so he just consummate.
Black is beautiful.
Right, he was just consummate, black is beautiful, like all the time, right? And then I get out of school, I'm in the workforce, I have a daughter, she was born in 89, and it's the 90s. And I realized I actually did have a bias against my skin color. I actually did see white America as more valuable. And I was like, how did that happen coming from the father that raised me? Like, how did that happen?
More valuable how? More intellect? More intelligent?
All around. I had this concept of beauty in their skin color and their hair texture. And I had this idea that in the workforce, I'm in the workforce, and in corporate America, I saw as if they had a greater intellect. Like these biases
they were superior.
They were superior. They just sat in my head. And I didn't realize they sat into my head until I interrogated my behavior.
You said, how did it happen? It happened in books, school, television, movies,
TV,
commercials,
all of that stuff. Right?
It was constant.
It was constant,
telling you that you're inferior.
Right, and so my father's words
Yes.
weren't enough to counteract that. Right?
Decades
because
of
it was decades of it.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I had a daughter, and I was like, I can't let this happen to my daughter. How do I stop her from getting in there?
Yes.
Right. My father was forceful about it, and I was like, could I be more forceful than him? Like, I didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
Until my sister introduced me to genealogy. So it's the mid-90s, and she would go to, older folks in my family, and she would interview them and take video and audio recordings.
Yes,
and,
yes,
She was doing all this stuff. And I started listening to her. She would talk to me about what she was learning.
Yes.
She learned about my father's father, my grandfather who died in '87. She learned that his mother died in the flu pandemic of 1918 in in Henderson, Texas. And that was fascinating to me. She showed me the death certificate. She learned that his father died 3 years before that. And so my grandfather was only 4 years old. His father had died, he was 7, his mother had died, and he had been raised by brothers and sisters. I didn't know any of this.
So your sister was doing 23andMe before it was invented?
Before there was an Ancestry.com, before any of that existed, she was she was literally traveling to places to get this information.
Yes, right? Yes.
And it just became incredibly fascinating to me. I learned about my second great-grandfather. His name was Ned Mills, which then told me where my last name came from, which was simply the last name of his last enslaver. And that was powerful when I learned that. And though I decided I wanted to go visit these places.
Yep.
So me and my sister, we flew to Texas in 2003 and looking for the places where my family were buried. My great-grandparents and my great-great-grandfather, Ned Mills, who was enslaved and was freed at the end of the Civil War, right, on Juneteenth. And we found where they were buried. They were buried behind a whites-only cemetery in the woods. And so we had to walk through these woods. We had to walk past this pristine whites-only cemetery to walk into these woods looking for them. And that had a profound effect on me, one which gave me a reverence for them. Like, I was like, I'm only alive because they survived what they had to endure.
You came from good stock.
Right. And like, I had this reverence now for them. And I also realized that I didn't learn a lot about them or the millions of people that were like them in school. I learned a lot about, individuals that I should revere, the people that were like the exceptionalists, like the Martin Luther Kings and the Medgar Evers and the Harriet Tubmans. I learned about them. But I considered them like in a 1 in a million equation, the one.
Yeah.
I didn't learn a lot about the million.
Yes.
And so now I wanted to know more. And so my sister started telling me more. I learned about my third great-grandfather on my mother's side. He was in the Civil War in the Navy. And he, after the Civil War, in Baltimore, after the Civil War, he died some years later and was buried in a colored cemetery in Baltimore, Laurel Cemetery.
Yes. Which
eventually was paved over in the 1960s. And so some 30,000 African Americans are now under this parking lot. And my third great-grandfather was one of them. And like every line she would trace down, there was a similar type story, which made me realize that my story is not an oddity. It's more of a common kind of story of the African American experience. And I continued to gain a pride in these people. Like it just was continual. A greater reverence for them the more I learned. And I wanted to give that to my kids. I wanted to give that to other people. Like I wanted them to see that my story isn't unusual. You likely have a similar story. Let's figure out what your story is. And that eventually took me down a path to kind of just follow in my sister's footsteps of stuff she had already been doing, to kind of dig into genealogy.
Is she still doing it, or?
She still does it. She's really focused on our family.
Where does she live?
She lives in Virginia.
Okay.
And she's a fascinating and wonderful and amazing at it. I learned most of everything I knew from her. I eventually took it on my own and then took a course at Boston University to kind of get a certificate from them into genealogy so I could just make sure that my skills were right. Like, I learned from my sister and she learned, on just kind of on her way long before any of these sites existed.
Catch as catch can.
Right, yes, and I wanted to go, are the patterns that she used and the things she taught me,
correct?
Are these kind of up to date? Yeah. And so when I found out, taking that course at Boston University, that I was very, I actually had learned a lot from her. They probably could learn a lot from her. Yeah. And so I was on a good track. And so I then started. She continues to, do genealogy into our family.
Yeah.
And now I I feel like I've got a wealth of information for my family. So now I dig into the families of others. I dig into those people that are unknown, and I learn as much as I can about them, and then I try to find their current day descendants so I can give them that information to
Do
them.
you publish any of your works, or?
Some of it is published, and I'm a little hesitant about that because I've learned over these few years that I've now am an organization doing this, that a lot of this information has been published. Some of it has been published, but no one ever tried to find the current day descendant. So then when I find them, they find out that all of this has been published about their family without their knowledge. So I'm a little hesitant now, which is another reason why I immediately find the families.
You contact them and
to
let them
share
know.
what I found so that I have their input on, like, well, what would you like to happen with this?
So if you thought from all of the outside influences that covered you as you were growing up, and shaped and colored your viewpoint of yourself, if you thought that you were inferior, did you believe that whites felt and acted and behaved as if they were superior?
Yeah, I didn't. I never went to that level of interrogation at the time.
Okay.
At the time, I was very focused on me. I was like, wait a minute, this is nuts. Like, how did I get here? But over time, at a minimum, I recognized that white Americans operated under a different self-view. Like, I don't know what that was, but I knew it was different than mine. It was different than me, at least the people I was operating around. And so, yeah, I definitely.
You don't want to stereotype.
Right.
But by and large, in general,
and in the workforce, and where I was,
you came to understand.
I came to understand.
That first, you're going to be judged by that color you have on a big black man.
Yes.
There we go.
Yes.
You know, I was fearful of the big black man.
I came to realize that, there was a concept of who I was before I walked in the room, and I recognized that I had that same concept in my own head.
Right, and if you go back, like you did, I'm sure, to the Constitution, where you're 3/5 of a person for chattel purposes, for taxes, for money. You're not even a human being.
Right.
I mean, so the founders were saying, no.
And I recognized, more importantly, I recognized that it was unconscious. Like, I didn't realize it. If you would have asked me before I came to that idea, I would have told you, no, that's not what I think, no. But, after really self-interrogating, really seeing how I was presenting in the world, really kind of looking into who I was.
Stopping and thinking about it.
I realized, no, I really am thinking that way. It required a lot of kind of reflection.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just something that I would have said off the top of my head.
Right. And it was something you didn't want to own.
And I did not want to own that. But once I really had to think about it, I had to own it. So that is the part of it that I felt it was very important, is that I felt like I was a good person. I felt like the people around me are really good people, but this is an unconscious thing. It's something that over decades, like you said, eventually gets kind of imprinted in your brain. And so one of those things that, empathy couldn't solve for, it's something that you have to have a willingness to really look internally to figure out that that's what you're doing.
How do you explain the election of Barack Obama?
Well, I think that's an incredibly fascinating case study. I think there are people much smarter than me that probably can talk to that. I was, as many probably were, incredibly hopeful and excited to see the election of an African American.
And scared that he wouldn't live to get elected.
I was also at the time very nervous about backlash.
What kind of backlash that we saw?
Yeah, I was really nervous about what would that mean for the years to come. Would there be a flip in
Would that
defiance?
stoke the fears
would that
more
stoke fears
than our white brothers and sisters?
Yeah. And I, the term fear, is one that I've had often relative to where I may travel, where I may go, what the community is like that I'm in. And I think the ideal of that, I think, is stoked by unconscious bias. And what we've talked about earlier, one of the things that I think probably most people don't recognize, that when I talk about this topic, it was out and got into this field. It was out of the idea that I could potentially change my daughter's mindset, but also to protect her. Like, I wanted her to have a pride in herself, but also affect other people, so that if there are ways that they're operating that may be holding up tenets of bias and racism that leave some of our statistics the way they are around housing or unemployment or incarceration or healthcare or wealth and income, all of those statistics that never seem to change, like, the marginalized remain down here. Those people that have these unconscious biases, that keep those numbers the same. Like, I wanted to affect them. Like, how do I do that, right? And that's still an ongoing thing.
Yeah, it's going to be ongoing. Yeah.
How do you affect that?
Did you come to the conclusion that perhaps you were a racist?
Absolutely.
And
oh yeah.
Talk about that.
In multiple ways.
Okay.
I came to a conclusion that I had a racist mindset against my own color, but against my own self. And I've come to that place and had to contemplate that. Post coming to that conclusion, I've had to contemplate, well, wait a minute, am I acting that way in the reverse now? I've had to self-interrogate constantly, which I think is good practice for us all. I think we should all be constantly self-interrogating. How are we presenting? How are we seeing things? How are we thinking? Are our mindsets biased? Are our mindsets racist? In every moment, in every interaction, I think we should be constantly thinking how we're presenting.
How we are presenting.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
How are we making decisions? How are we hiring? How are we deciding where we live, where we shop? How are we deciding who we interact with and who we don't? And everything we do.
Who we love, who we date.
Who we date, we should be thinking about where are our ideals coming from, what's the germination of that, where did it come from? Are our decisions based on anything broader than just the person in front of us?
I considerably older than you and a lot less handsome, but I grew up in the middle of the 19th century, the middle of the 20th century, and I grew up seeing signs for whites only.
Yeah.
There was a park right down the street from my house that we couldn't go in.
Mm-hmm.
There were swimming pools we couldn't go in.
Yeah.
I remember the look in my father's eyes when I would ask him as a kid, a kid wants to swim. He doesn't, and my dad would say, we can't go in there.
Right.
And it draws at your soul.
Yeah.
You mentioned Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
There's a poem that always comes to mind. Once while riding in old Baltimore, heart filled, head filled with glee, I saw a Baltimorean keep looking straight at me, but I was small and very young, and he was no whit bigger. And so I smiled, and he looked at me and called me a. I've seen the whole of Baltimore from May until December. Of all the things that happened there, that's all that I remember.
Wow, absolutely. That powerful moment.
Yeah, it's a moment that happened. My birthday present was segregation, the law of the land.
Right.
Loving versus Virginia didn't happen until, I guess, 67, around in that area. Or was it 76 even? Maybe Loving versus Virginia is one of those dates. I think it's 76, but in any event, that's the story of a black woman and a white man had to leave Virginia because of anti-miscegenation laws, and they could not love one another,
right?
As I believe we were intended to.
Right.
I think we've put, if you listen to people, God put the Africans in Africa, He put the Italians in Italy, He put the Spanish in Spain, and He didn't want us to mix. That's a lie.
That's right.
It's always been a lie.
That's correct.
It's a lie now.
That's right.
And people still buy it and believe it.
Absolutely.
When you see a couple walking down the street, the man is black and the woman is white, they are the normal ones.
That's right.
You know,
That's right.
They're not, it's not the other way around.
That's right.
You know, and I'm not saying you can't marry who you prefer. Fine, but that's the point of what we're saying.
Absolutely.
If we weren't intended to love each other, and to be in love with each other, and to take care of each other, if we were not intended
That's right.
to happen, it wouldn't happen.
That's right.
Okay, because no matter, biology tells you it's a lie.
That's right.
You know,
Absolutely.
that any body part I have can save your life.
That's correct.
And if that wasn't intended, it wouldn't happen.
That's correct.
And I know my gay brothers and sisters would get upset at what I'm about to say, but that's not the point I'm trying to make. You're never going to see the offspring of a giraffe and a gerbil. You're never going to see that. You're never going to see the offspring of a dolphin and a donkey. That's not going to happen in your life.
Right.
But any woman anywhere in the world, if she's ovulating
Right.
and I'm fertile, she can have my baby.
That's correct.
That's the sign right there.
That tells you right
That's
there.
it right there.
That's
Look
right.
at it,
Right.
you know, and don't try to deny it.
That's right.
You know, don't try to brutalize it and demonize it. No, it means we were supposed to love each other.
That's correct. That's absolutely right.
So my gay brothers and sisters, I know the argument's been used. You know, it's you're supposed to have babies. No, Jesus never condemned homosexuality. He never did, and don't tell me it didn't exist. You know,
That's right.
So I think I'm gonna err on the side of two people loving each other.
Two people
Versus
loving
hating each other
Absolutely.
any day of the week.
Any day of the week.
Any day of
That's
the week
right.
is where I'm going to roll on that one.
Absolutely.
So my experiences were very, very similar to yours, except it was in my face with signs.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
we couldn't go certain places. At night, we had to be certain places, or
That's
else
right.
you were in physical danger.
Absolutely.
You know,
what's
so-
interesting about that
Yeah.
is what I learned about my grandfather, Mylon Mills, that I told you about earlier, who died in '86.
Yes, yes.
I learned that the reason he was in California was because in the early mid-30s, 1930s, he was in an interracial relationship. And his brothers were all much older than him. He was the youngest child. He was born in 1911, and all of his brothers were born around 1900 or prior in the 1800s.
Yep.
And so they thought he was about to get hung.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
he had an older brother who was a few years older than him who had moved to California. So they sent for him. His name was A.C. Mills. They had him come back to Texas and forced him to leave with AC to go to California because they were in fear that he was going to be hung over an interracial relationship.
You just used that term again, interracial.
Mm-hmm.
There's only one race.
You're absolutely right.
See,
I
that's part
stand
of
corrected.
that's part of
stand
the
corrected.
part of the conditioning.
Absolutely.
You know, when you keep thinking, not just
Right.
you, I'm not.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when you keep thinking interracial,
Right.
it's like
It creates the
extraterrestrial.
line.
Right.
It
It's
creates the line.
extraterrestrial. No.
That's right.
It's one race.
Absolutely.
You know, she's a woman.
That's
He's a man.
That's right.
Nature doesn't know I'm a black man.
That's absolutely
Nature
right.
doesn't care about that.
That's
what
right.
nature cares about is I got a man, I got a woman.
That's it. That's
we
all.
could roll.
That's all.
We could roll. Or I got two people who love each other.
That's right.
We could roll.
That's
we could roll.
absolutely right.
So I'm looking forward to the second part of this interview in which you talk about
Yes.
Fortune and what's happening in November. So,
Yes.
So, don't go anywhere.
I'm
Stay
not
right
going
there.
anywhere. I'm
All
right here.
That's the first part of my interview with Mr. John Mills. I just called him a genealogist and a wonderfully young, intelligent young man. Hey, you know what? Everybody has a story. What's yours? Until next time, I am your host, James Ransom Reed Jr. Good night.
Hi, I'm Jay McCormick, a board director at Nutmeg TV, your local public TV station right here in Farmington. Nutmeg TV has been an integral part of our community for over 30 years, providing a platform for residents to share stories, voice concerns, and celebrate achievements. It's a vital resource that connects us all, bringing countless local events to our TV screens. The topics are limitless and vary from being aware of scams to veterans helping veterans. Nutmeg TV continues to be here for the community. To continue this important work, we're asking for your support through a donation. Your contribution will ensure that Nutmeg TV remains a robust and relevant resource for our community. Thank you for supporting Nutmeg TV. Together, we can continue to amplify the voices and stories that make our community unique and vibrant.
To make a donation, simply visit our website at nutmegtv.com or call the office at 860-321-7405 for assistance.